welcome back to Break It to Make It, the show where we meet people who have thrown out the rule book, failed forwards, or taken the road less traveled to come out on top. Today, we're talking about the brain. Never in the history of humans have we had access to so much information or had to balance so much in our lives. We've entered a time where we seem to have accepted that burnout is just a thing that happens and something that happens to many of us. But the question we're asking today is why? And is there something that we can do about it? And can we use neuroscience to help us take back control and improve our lives and our overall well-being? Our guest today is a speaker, author, coach, and trainer. She's somebody that I've known for many years, and I'm delighted to have her here as a guest today. She specializes in neuroscience programs for business and has dedicated her life to bridging academia and the corporate world to help people live their best lives and deliver their peak performance. Welcome to the show, Vannessa McCamley.
Welcome, Fallon. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so delighted because this part of your life that you're sharing with us today is something that's also very near and dear to me, and I love your story. For our listeners, you're the happiest that you've ever been, but I want to take us back to a time when it wasn't like that. Can you please tell me about the time in your life where you realized that you needed to make a radical change, that moment that started you down this path and got you to where you are?
Yes, Fallon, there were really four key moments. And the first one was at school. I was one of those people who worked really hard but never quite got that result. But I was a workhorse. So working hard to get a result, and I'd work, never quite got to where I wanted to be. But those learnings actually helped me in my career because I would just work harder than anybody else building my career. So I was very determined as a young woman. And then when I got into corporate world, because I'd just go the extra mile, for me, that was my secret weapon, and I was rewarded for that. But it got to the point where I was traveling and working and studying 80 hours a week, and I got fatigued and burnt out myself. So I got ill, and I didn't take the lessons that I was learning. It was like, that's okay. I can't miss my KPIs, which is your key performance indicators. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, Fallon, in your own world. And that whole bell curve system in the corporate world of wanting to be at the top, and then you get extra shares for being up the top. And that's the reward that I was getting at that at that peak, and not wanting to fall off that peak. So even in my sick bed, I was still working and working hard to try to keep up, and really wasn't focusing on my health, really, at the time. So at that point in time, I got sick. And then my mentor, who was managing New Zealand office for us at the time, he also got sick, and he's like a warrior, right? So I thought if anyone was to get sick, he would get better, but he didn't. And he actually passed away at the age of 45. He ended up with cancer. But again, he was like, if you can recall a James Dean from the 1950s, he was so much like that, the Harley, the leather jacket. And he was like a zest for life. But he was also working really, really hard, he played hard and worked hard, and I think it caught up with him, and he left behind him with two beautiful daughters and a beautiful partner, and that really kicked me hard. And I really thought, oh gosh, there has to be another way to be successful in business and contribute and hit these goals, but without actually affecting our health. Then I had my son shortly after that, which was a struggle as well, because I had the starting of cervical cancer beforehand. When I said I got sick, there was a risk there that I wouldn't be able to have children. And so it was a real struggle. Then when I did have my son, who's amazing, he's 17 years old today, and he's a rock climber, and he's doing his final year at school this year. and he's doing amazingly well. But he got really sick. So he was sick from 6 months old with infant asthma. And then he almost died at 18 months old. One of his lungs collapsed. So when you're an infant and you have asthma, every cold is like getting pneumonia. And for him, he was in and out of hospital from 6 months old. And then he got he got a cold, and the cold turned into pneumonia, and then his lung collapsed and he was going blue in my arms when I had to carry him. And then I had to get to the hospital, and it was very, very stressful, the worst Easter I've ever had in my life. And that was a defining moment for me, because I thought to myself, okay, it's been my health, it's been my mentor's health, now it's my son's health. I can't keep up doing this corporate world the way I was before. And key lesson there too is that my skill set that I was and behavior that I was leaning on from a work perspective was perfectionism.
Mm.
And so perfectionism for me, so when I had, I was working already 80 hours before I went on maternity leave. Then I had to come back and readjust to, well, how am I going to get results, but in new ways? But I didn't have the skills and the tool sets, and I didn't know anything about the neuroscience of leadership or performance or how my brain worked. I was just in a threat state all the time
Yeah,
and
and
not
just
getting sleep with an
surviving
infant.
and not
Well,
and not and not thriving. And I think many people, I mean, you can see me nodding my head off my shoulders here, but there are so many people I think who can relate to this. Maybe we've been fortunate enough to not have been faced with as much fear and tragedy, but still that perfectionism cycle and the continually moving the goalposts. I know you and I have spoken about this before, but this funny part of the human condition where we set ourselves a goal and we think once we get there, we're going to be happy. Once we get there, it's going to be great. And then we get there and then we move it. And we're never quite happy. And it's always on, and we're just working harder and harder and harder and, chasing those golden handcuffs that you talked about. But help us understand, I can see this is where the light went on for you. And then you didn't have the skills. But what are the skills that we need to set up our brain for our best life? What were the skills that were missing that really turned it around for you?
so to continue that story, so what happened for me next was that I did end up going out and starting my own business, which I did nearly 9 years ago. And then when I was working for another IT software company as a consultant, there was these two amazing South African gentlemen who were working on a program which was neuroscience based. And they said, Vannessa, before you touch this program, go and have a look at these books. So I went and picked up those books, and I could not put it down. And for me, it was the light bulb moment that I realized that, oh my God, this is how my brain works. This is why I've been doing that. Like, I didn't even know that it was perfectionism that was actually hindering me. I didn't know any of that. It was like all of a sudden I understood my journey and understood that this had to be my future going forward. I had to not only learn this myself, so I went back and studied neuroscience from a leadership and performance perspective, and I re-skilled and retrained. And it's turned everything around for me personally. So you talked about my happiness, because I understood how my brain works. And my son is dyslexic, but is absolutely incredible, and he's achieving amazing things. Like yesterday, he first time ever to get top in his class in English. Like, English is the hardest topic for him. He got 90%, which has never happened in an exam. I know, I'm so proud of him.
Congratulations. I'm so proud of him.
And he's really struggled, like really struggled all the way through school. And it's still a struggle, but he knows what he wants, but it's really trying to set him up in brain friendly ways. So I've really applied everything that I've learned to every element of my life, not just mine, my family's, my clients. And what is that? It's really understanding how the brain mechanism actually works for threat and reward, and what's the basic instinct. So To explain that really, really quickly, is that we have obviously the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is responsible for executive function. And it's the part of the brain that's evolved the most. And then you have the limbic system, which is your emotional center, and everything goes through the emotional center. So I don't know about you, Fallon, but when I was working my way through the corporate world for over 20 odd years, I was always taught by my mentors and leaders that, oh, Vanessa, when it comes to business, it's business. It's not, you don't bring emotions. Emotions are for home. But actually studying the brain, it was like, again, another light bulb moment for me to go, actually, everything goes through the emotional center of the brain, everything.
Yeah, in fact,
Because
you can't make decisions without emotion because it's how you feel about those decisions that ultimately decides where you go. And there's a guy who's done some really great research on that. But yes, everything is emotional.
yes. And so we are actually emotional beings that think, and not thinking beings that have emotions. And so for me, I've had to rewire a whole lot of belief systems that I was taught by people I looked up to and go, oh my gosh, we had so many things wrong. There's such a big gap between what science knows and how we actually doing things. We've got to actually bridge that gap. And that's the mission that I have been on, to understand that and to help people understand what puts them into distress. What are the threat triggers? What are the reward triggers? So the difference between a threat state and a reward state, and by the way, the brain is scanning 5 times per second while we're here together, for threat and reward. And we're more sensitive towards a threat. I mean, you just think of the media. What do you see? You see more threat stuff than reward stuff. They may have a cute puppy or or something at the end of the news, or a good news story, but majority of it is more towards a threat. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would. And I even think about my own threat perception now as a parent. I know we've talked a lot about our kids, but I think back to when I was a child and how I would experience, say, a childlike activity, say, riding my bike out. I would go and tear up and down the neighborhood with my brothers all day, come home when the streetlights are on. I cannot bring myself to let my children out of my sight. I will let them be on the street, but only if we're out there watching them. I'm really sensitive to those types of things, and it's something that just seems to be ingrained in me, and it's changed over time.
It has changed. And even with my son now, even being 17, I often say to my husband, times have really changed about growing up. So I took my son to the concert the other week to see, I don't know if you know, he's for the young ones, Kid Leroy. He's Australian, he's part Aboriginal. He's just done a tour in the US and been very successful over there. Anyway, I bought my tickets over a year ago, and I took my son, which I didn't think he'd want to go with me. I said, "You can take a mate." He goes, "No, mum, you come." And it was like a whirlwind. I felt like I was in another planet. I mean, I absolutely loved it. And I feel very grateful that I have a 17-year-old that still wants to take mum to a concert. So I'm grateful. But I worked out, like, it's so different for the young ones. It's such a different generation to mine. And I don't feel like I'm that disconnected until I went to this concert and went, it's really different for the young ones coming up through the ranks. It felt like a different planet for me.
And it feels like there's a lot more, like things are a lot higher stakes. I think, when you and I were coming up in the world, we could learn our lessons, make our mistakes, do embarrassing things, and didn't have to worry about it ending up on the internet.
Yes.
And
I think that's very important. Like I get in trouble from him often going, "Mum, I didn't give you permission to actually publish that."
to publish that photo and the amount of bullying and all that sort of stuff. But that's that. I think even our children are more ingrained in this threat status because it's not just the media, but we're bombarded, like you talk about, with all of this information, and we have to process it. And this concept of a personal brand, because
Yes.
both you and I have come up in marketing careers, right? But 20 years ago, we weren't talking about our personal brand. And we have kids today who are talking about personal brand, 8-year-olds who are like have brand colors, just things like that. It's just so different.
It is different. And my son has his own vision board, which is not created by me, even though I teach people how to do that and how to set up their brain for success. But he did this all on his own through school. And it's every time he puts the switch on, there's his vision board. He knows he's basically mapped out his next 10 to 20 years, which I think is amazing and incredible. And I don't dare to tweak it because I go, oh, there was a part of my brain goes, oh, if he does this and that, he'd get there quicker. And I thought, you know what? It's not mine. And he doesn't, he goes, oh, mum, you're not going to talk about the brain again, are you? so, so I have to be really careful. But do you know what? If you give them enough to be able to set it up for themselves and to help empower them, he's very, very focused. And I just think it's amazing. The struggles that he's facing with being dyslexic is really interesting because I think it's his superpowers. And I actually really big advocate for neurodiversity and for people who think differently. We definitely need people to think differently. We need that. And we also need people who can collaborate. And I think the future is more about that collaboration than being those lone wolves and building up your own career. It's about how do you actually collaborate and lead people successfully together. I think that
Absolutely.
is the key.
Absolutely. And I love some of the things you talk about. We're talking about threat and reward here and this concept of brain friendly things. I want to create space right now for you to teach us a little bit about dopamine. And
Yes.
what can you tell us about dopamine? What is it? How does it work? And what role does it play in leadership, collaboration, teams, what you were just talking about there?
So dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it's a neurochemical that really helps us to be able to tap into the reward circuitry of our brain. So we have threat and we have reward. And remember, I said to you a moment ago, threat, our brain is more sensitive towards a threat. And when we experience a threat, it can stay within the brain for a long time. That's why, like, if you think of the last time you had conflict or an argument with someone or had a difference of opinions, you might have said a couple of hours later, oh, why didn't I say this or why didn't I do this? And so what happens there in that moment is that the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, gets blocked out. Now, the reward mechanism is the dopamine. So that's the brain's happy drug, and we get that for feeling a reward. So every time we feel like we achieve something or a customer says, oh, wow, great job, love that. Like, for example, I had a customer yesterday reach their 90-day goal. And she was ecstatic, like absolutely ecstatic. I wouldn't have thought that I could have got here in 90 days, but I feel totally different and I've actually reached my goal. And that's dopamine. So she had loads of dopamine, and that dopamine's also contagious. So from a managing and leading people perspective, when you can give your team as much dopamine, so making them laugh, making them smile. So research has shown that for high performing teams, the manager and leader is making their people laugh and smile 3 times more than average performing teams. So, what does this mean? It means that when people are having fun, when people know what the vision is and how they fit in with the vision, you get the doses of dopamine and you need them quite regularly. And something that I think's happened over the pandemic is that we weren't getting enough reward. We kept moving on to the next thing, the next thing, and next thing, and we weren't celebrating long enough. And that's why when my son, for example, came home yesterday, I was so excited to get 90% first time ever in English in his an exam paper. We made a really big deal of it. And it's like, yeah, let's make this a celebration and let's ring people and tell them about it. And, let's make it a bit of a party because he's worked so hard to get there and let's celebrate it. And this is what leaders need to also do with their people is instead of we climb one mountain and one goal, we get there and then we move on to the next and then we move on to the next. And then these days it feels like we've got 7 mountains going at the one time. So I'm calling mountains goals here. And so I feel like that we just don't make time to actually celebrate that and understand how your people want to celebrate it. Not how you think as a leader it should be celebrated, but how do you want, like I asked my son as an example, how do you want to celebrate that? He goes, oh, I'd like to go out to dinner. Okay, done. We'll do that. Book that. And so again, it's really about understanding your people, understanding what puts them in a threat and a reward state, and how to actually get dopamine into their brains on a regular basis is really the key.
So, a few times you've talked about setting your brain up for success, and I can see how you do it in your life and how your son is doing it in his life, and understanding those things. And you've talked about the tools, but how do we set our brains up to be successful? How do we set our brains up to live our best life?
Well, this is where I created the food framework, which is in my book, Rewire for Success, which was my COVID New Year's resolution to make a positive difference in the lives of others. I was also, when COVID hit, my business was impacted. A lot of my keynote presentations were cancelled, and all of those sorts of things. Like a lot of us had to deal with a whole lot of change. Um, and I was in freeze mode at the time, and it was my girlfriend who's a business person as well, and her business was impacted as well. And we said, let's set a goal, something we really want to do that's positive, and say we actually achieved something amazing during COVID. And that was the book for me. It was a dream that I had for a long time, and then COVID gave me the opportunity to make time to actually kickstart that. And the food framework is really, really crucial. So, what that stands for is the F stands for fuel. What ingredients do you need to actually set up your brain? So, I'm working with a lot of people who are at all different stages within their life. So some are very burnt out, fatigued, overwhelmed, or just don't know the direction they want to go in. They feel like they're made for more and don't know what that is. Also, I work obviously with teams and organizations to bridge the gap between their vision and how they execute that through their people in brain friendly ways without burning their people out. It's all about balance. But fueling, if you don't have fuel, then you can't actually do something new, right? And so fueling is about looking at all the core ingredients. So diet, exercise. And exercise is a very loose word, but it's really about the core is getting oxygen into the brain. When you can get oxygen into the brain throughout your day, it can give you more productivity for longer periods of time. So things like brain breaks are really important. So working for and concentrating for a period of time and then having those breaks. Um, Mindfulness, actually turning your brain off and actually just observing what's happening for you and being in the moment is really, really important. And something this year has been at the core of my goals this year is about being in the now. Our brain is known to be a time traveler, right? We're the only species that time travel. Do you know what I mean by that? Do you have
No,
any
tell me about
guesses?
it. No.
So we can go back in time and we can go forward in time. So we're always trying to predict, and our brain is a prediction machine. It's always trying to predict what's going to happen. But actually, we're more resilient than what we think. So you even look through this whole pandemic, is that we've been able to bounce back a lot better than trying to predict how we were going to actually bounce back. And so, why that's really, really important is because that takes a lot of energy. We take a lot of energy to go back in time and forward in and going forward. And a lot of people have been seeking certainty, particularly if they like control, right? If certainty is one of your key social drivers. And by the way, I've been one of those as well. I've had to rewire that over time, though my family will still tell you that I am one of those. Uh, but the thing is, with time traveling, that takes a lot of energy. So, actually being mindful, taking time out, and because we're living busy lives, not just our lives, but for those who have families, we dedicate our weekends to sport and music and a whole lot of other things. And we're go, 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 go. But what I've learned about the brain is we actually need downtime. We actually need to recharge. And it's really important to work out how to fuel your brain. And sleep is really core. It's and it's not just something for adults, it's also for children. We're just not quite getting enough sleep. but it's about incrementing your sleep by 15-minute blocks. So not huge, like people go, oh, I'm going to go and get an extra hour or 2 hour. Go, don't do that straight away. You got to actually work your way up to that, because it's like having jet lag otherwise. You feel worse when you've had lots of sleep. So it's about incremental. It's about understanding the nuances in what do you need in your diet, what do you need in your sleep, what do you need to do to actually have time blocked out for just you time. It's sort of like being on a plane, Fallon. I know you've been on many like I have over the years. And the air hostess says, make sure you put your mask on first before you serve others.
Mm.
And that is really a crucial tip, is that we need to do practice self-care first. Have the energy, because we're actually all made up of energy and we thrive of each other on energy. So that's why emotions are contagious, and being happy and being calm is contagious, which again, high performing teams really needs a manager or a leader that does bring their A game, that brings that energy in. And we all have bad days. We all have good days, but it's about understanding how to regulate that. The next ingredient in the food framework is about um, organizing your daily structure based on where you do your best thinking.
Mm.
So knowing where you do your best thinking, what is it for you, Fallon? Are you a morning, afternoon, evening, or a combination?
I'm definitely a morning person. I lose the ability to speak in the afternoon.
So knowing that, and look, you can still combat that and still set up your day differently when you know you have to do that. Um, but yeah, knowing where you do your best thinking, and also minimize the distractions during that deep thinking time, because it's so easy to do social media, get stuck in your inbox, in your emails, and time goes, and then you've exhausted that precious time. And we have on average around 3 to 4 hours of key productivity in a 24-hour period, unless you know how um, to actually extend that to double that through getting oxygen, all those ingredients that I just spoke about before, setting up your brain so that you can continually be able to sustain that throughout your day and your week, so that you don't get to Friday and feel like I'm going to fall over, I'm exhausted. And then you get through to the weekend and you just start to feel a bit better, and then you're back full on Monday.
Yeah.
So it's really important to how you set up your brain. The second O is about overcoming obstacles with the brain in mind. And so it's really about understanding and priming the brain for the unknown, right? Knowing what obstacles. And so a really big tip there would be to make sure that in our diaries that we're not fully chock a block, actually have time out for obstacles in your day. A tip in the morning, a break in the morning, and a break in the afternoon to deal with things that you don't know that's going to happen, or someone might need you. It's really, really important that we actually not have diaries that are fully booked every single day, and we don't have the adaptability to be able to change as things change.
That's a
Uh,
really good tip. Is expect the unexpected, and so create space for things. That's a good tip.
it's a bit like a fire drill. We've learnt over the years of, if the fire bells goes off, we got to stand up, be in a calm way, have what all those instructions are. Yes, walking, not running, all of those great things. In my book, actually gives people models to actually how to get unstuck when facing obstacles. And I have clients that say that they've actually written out tags. So every time they have an obstacle, they go back to those sections and they swear by it, that they work through those steps, and wow, they solve and become unstuck. And they say it works every single time that they work through it. So having actions for me is really important. I know actions are really important for you too. Is that the book was designed so that you could learn about your brain, but also apply it and actually have tools that make a really big difference in your life to become unstuck. Because let's face it, every day is an obstacle course. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'm really excited too to find out what the D is about. So we've learned about the first F, the O, and tell us about the D.
Is driving the right behaviors, so understanding how to actually change behaviors. We often have behaviors that no longer serve us. So they might have served us in the past. And I'll give the example of me, which was about being a perfectionist. I still have perfectionism within me, but I've actually lessened it because I now know what the triggers of that is, and I have questions that I ask myself when I get to that perfectionist triggers. And so for me, it's about understanding about how we deal with that imposter monster, which sits on your shoulder and niggles at you and tells you all these things that you're either not good at. Like, for example, with my book, when I was writing my book, it was like there was these little niggles that say, who are you to write a book? And, there's lots of books out there. Why is yours different? But that why is yours different was like, oh, I'm going to take that and turn that into something positive and go, I wrote an I am statement, which is really powerful. It's an affirmation statement, which I talk about in this section of driving the right behaviors. And I changed that niggle to I am an author of greatness. And then I had the question on there, why? Because not only have I been able to transform my life and my family's life, but I have been able to help thousands of people turn around their lives and live their best life. And I have something of value to share because it's been my life's work. Everything I've learned is really what I'm sharing with people to be able to help them to be able to make the right choices in work, life, and for well-being.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that food framework with us. So just give us the quick four trigger words to remember. Spell it out for us and just recap just there quickly.
Yes, so fuel your brain with the right ingredients. Organize your daily structure based on where you do your best thinking. Overcome obstacles with the brain in mind and driving the right behaviors.
Fantastic. So many amazing lessons there. And I love your bias for action. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people in our audience. And before we let you go today, I do want to ask, what are the two biggest tips that you have for our audience? If we're inspired to go and change our lives after meeting you today, what are those two things, those two tips?
And this is really important. I did a lot of thinking about this because I wanted it to be action based. So I have two. There's one I've already spoke about, but I want to emphasize it because I think it's crucial. Because our brain craves certainty, it's booking time in your diary for the unknown in the morning and in the afternoon so that you have time slots when things change, because we often have a huge to-do list and we feel like if we do this we get the dopamine hit. We've got to change the brain to actually get dopamine for actually solving problems that we didn't know about yesterday that arise today. So plan for the unknown, have time allocated in the afternoon and in the morning so that you have that freedom if you need to pivot. If you don't need to use them, great, you've got extra time to tick off those extra things that you had planned for the day. The second one is building reflection time in the morning and the afternoon, minimum 5 minutes to really reflect and answer this question. What do you want? How do you want to feel by the end of the day? So that's your morning question, reflection question. How do you want to feel? What's your intention for the day? And I want you to use 5 minutes to actually think about your day, how you want to navigate. How do you want to navigate the unknown? How do you actually want to navigate through the day? But not what are you going to do today, but how are you going to feel today? And then at the end of the day, before you go to bed, reflect back, go, what did I learn today? What could I do differently tomorrow based on what I've learnt today? And if you can, write that down. And then when you do your reflection the next morning, you come back to that going, what's my intention? And based on what did I learn yesterday? And that continues on. You change the neurons within your brain and you totally have a different day to if you just get up and go through your task list. So give it a go, try it, and reach out to me and let me know if you can put those two tips into action. I'd love to hear from the audience how they go, actually, what changes they notice, and how do they actually connect with others differently to how they were before.
That's fantastic. And for those of you who are listening, when you do go and put that into practice, and when you do want to learn more from Vannessa, you can reach out to her through her LinkedIn or through her website, which is linksuccess.com.au. Of course, don't forget to check out her book, and don't forget to come and join us back here again on Break It to Make It. Thank you so much for joining us today, Vannessa. Yours is an inspiring story, and you have helped and continue to help so many people rewire their brains and live their best lives. Thank you for taking the time and being on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.